At 6, an effort to remove the Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein from the ballot has failed. Wisconsin Supreme Court decided today not to hear a challenge brought by the DNC employee David Stein, who is seeking to remove her from the list of options this coming November. The Democrats are concerned that third-party candidates could draw votes away from Vice President Kamala Harris, potentially helping Republican nominee Donald Trump to win the state. Stein argued the party could not nominate presidential electors because it does not have candidates authorized to do so. Meanwhile, the Green Party, alongside Republicans, claimed they met all legal requirements. In the end, the court determined that Wisconsin voters should have the option to vote for Stein, allowing her to remain on the ballot.